Steve, it's so good to see you again. It's always a thrill and a joy to see your face in this Zoom context. I love our conversations. We've had so many good ones in the past, and once again on this August morning on the East Coast, a little overcast. A pleasure to be talking to you. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. It's a pleasure to be talking to you too.
Yes. What did you think? What did you think, Steve, of the Barbie movie?
Uh, I thought a lot of things. I thought a lot of things about it. Uh, I thought that aside from a couple of make you look up from your phone moments, it was kind of dull. I'm not really understanding why it's grossed $50 billion or something like that, unless that's just nostalgia, or that it's not just dull, but easy. It could be that it's just easy. Uh, Whereas the Oppenheimer movie, the other half of the cultural phenomenon of the summer, is not as easy, although may the director rot in hell for how hard he tried to make it easy.
Mm.
May he rot in hell for that. But it's not a subject that you can really do that in, even when you're trying your hardest. It's not a subject you can really do, whereas Barbie it is. But there were elements in Barbie that I was watching for, that I was waiting for, because on YouTube there's an entire ecosystem of neck-bearded alt-right quasi-fascist commentariat channels. They live for any hint of wokery in popular culture. They find it everywhere. They go looking for it, and they're baked into the business model of things like Barbie, called fan baiting, where the studios will actually have meetings saying, all right, what elements can we add in to guarantee negative press, to guarantee an avalanche of hatred? What elements can we work in to fan bait? Because it's free advertising. There were lots of that, I thought, in Barbie, but a lot of it seemed to me to be done with almost a wink and a nod. I don't know. In a way, it sounds really dumb to say, but in a way, Barbie could be a barometer of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Movie could be a barometer, not in some of the important ways. It's boring, it's derivative. In that way, it is not a barometer of the industry. It's just a straight up thermometer of the industry. The industry has almost no creativity left in it. But as a barometer of the industry, because 5 years ago, you would have needed to put in the social justice, virtue signaling stuff in earnest. It would have needed to be there in earnest, always in your movie. There couldn't have been any nod and wink in the movie. Whereas here, that stuff is in the movie, but it seems almost like it's been dialed up to parody. Like, look, we know that we have to put this in here, but we don't mean it anymore. Or maybe I'm not making any sense at all. Am I not making
I
any?
hear
Should
what
we
you're saying. I hear what
synopsize
you're
the
saying.
Barbie movie? We should probably synopsize what happens in the movie.
Yes, I think so. Let's take a step back. First of all, let's just say right now, this will be spoilers, right? We'll talk spoilers.
Lots of spoilers. If
Yeah.
you can spoil a toy movie.
Yeah. Well, I'll say before we go any further, I love the Barbie movie. I think it can be spoiled. So that's my recommendation. Steve may disagree with that. That's fine. Are we gonna talk about Oppenheimer also? I saw Oppenheimer. Did you see Oppenheimer?
I've seen it a few times.
Okay, so there's risk for Oppenheimer spoilers, although I think those are less of a concern.
And another spoiler. The effing planet you live on is round. Okay? There's another spoiler we ought to chuck in
Yes.
there.
So question. So you liked sounds like you liked Oppenheimer a lot more than Barbie. Is that fair to say?
No, I didn't like either one of them.
You like either one of them? Okay.
No. Radically different reasons, but I didn't like either one of them.
Well, you know what? We're gonna do both. We'll get to masculinity later, but let's do both. What was your issue with Oppenheimer? Let's start with Oppenheimer, if you don't mind.
It's a fan film for atomic warfare.
Mm.
It's my main beef with it is that the end result is this guy's fantastic. Yay, let's cheer him. Let's hike him onto our shoulders. What are we going to criticize him for? Well, being a commie. Not 15 completely incinerated blocks of cities lived in by civilians, old women, children. We're not gonna criticize him for that. We're gonna criticize him because maybe he's a commie. It was bizarre propaganda. was my main beef with it. I mean, I had lots of other beefs too. I would love it if someone somewhere in Hollywood could maybe slip a note under a casting director's door that simply says Matt Damon can't act. I don't think it would matter, but maybe just do that. Maybe just slip that note under a door somewhere. He's always, look, I'm going to act. He's always looking at the camera. He's looking at the director. He's doing it since he was a teenager. Now he's getting middle-aged roles, so I imagine that we're stuck with it. But no, my main beef with it is that it was the end of Dr. Strangelove without irony. It was the Slim Pickens riding the atomic bomb down like it was a rodeo horse, only without irony. That's just amazing to me. It's amazing to me that you could do that. Just amazing to me that you could do that. Mm-hmm. I've been very, very encouraged by the near universal condemnation of the movie from Japanese movie bloggers. That's very heartening to see. I'm glad the mind rot has not reached the new generation.
Okay. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I do think that criticism makes sense, but I feel like in the scope of like World War II movies that exist that I'm aware of, this felt like more of a nuanced, sensitive approach to the morality of atomic warfare than what I think is standard in American discourse and American media. I felt like the United States government persecuted him for being a commie, but I don't think that the viewer walked away feeling like that was his flaw. But anyway, I hear what you're saying. We don't need to go deeper than that into the litigation of this issue, but that's interesting. Again, interesting diversion of interpretations or opinions there.
In the movie, when does Oppenheimer himself, the character, have his John Wayne moment? Swelling soundtrack, high chaparral, blazing sun, actual horseback riding. When does he have that moment?
I think he has
moment when he succeeds in building the worst, most terrifying, most indiscriminately destructive weapon in the history of humanity. He has that moment when he succeeds at doing that. He rides out for a deep breath.
Do you feel like he was in the movie, in the world of the movie, as portrayed by Nolan? Do you feel like he was haunted by his role in the atomic bomb?
In the movie, you see that he is haunted, and it is framed by the director in exactly the way to make you, the viewer, say, Oppie, don't be so hard on yourself. You're supposed to be rushing in like the other characters do. You're supposed to think that him being hard on himself is irrational. You're supposed to sympathize with him instead of with his thousands and thousands and thousands of victims.
I hear that. What do you think about the ending? The last lines of the movie, Oppenheimer and Einstein, the big reveal. What was said between them? Was that, did you like that ending or no?
No. I didn't like that ending. No. It makes Oppenheimer into that what I did to the world was accidental. I'm talking to the sage ethereal genius, and what I did was, I thought I was in the right, but it turns out other people will pervert what I thought was right into something horrible, and I will be haunted by that. And it is crafted by Nolan as this kind of amazing light bulb moment that I've had this shocking, horrible realization. Any hint that enlightened, fuzzy-haired scientist was telling Oppenheimer that for years is completely missing. It's completely absent from the show. Instead, it's a shocking moment. I can't believe what these horrible government men
All right. So that's Oppenheimer. How about Barbie movie?
Yes. In the Barbie movie, Barbie is living in her toyland. She's living in her playset, and everything is bright pink and psychedelic and wonderful and cloned and innocent.
On a scale from 0 to 10, the visual aesthetic of the movie, what would you give just that part of the movie?
Oh, the visual aesthetic for the Barbie sections is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely criticizing the visual aspects of Nolan's movie. I wouldn't criticize the visual aspect of the Timothée Chalamet Dune. Hollywood has some visual stuff down. I'm okay with that. Absolutely. These aren't filmed with cardboard in somebody's backyard. considering what they rake in money, although not now. Now that a strike has brought them down. But yeah, the visuals in Barbie are fine. But Barbie is in that perfect playland, and then she leaves it for the real world. And she accidentally brings Ken along. And the real world is very different. It's full of horrible, horrible people. Horrible people, opportunistic people, predatory people, greedy people, violent people. And there's a word for those people. And you might think that word is real. No, that word is men. That word is men. The word is men. And that, when I was watching, was making me think, okay, well, this is the stupid progressive politics checkbox that Hollywood now does just uniformly, which is that no male character can be good, masculine, and effective all at the same time. Absolutely forbidden. They can be good, but feminine and ineffective. They can be good and feminine, but ineffective. They can be some combination, but they can't be all three. And of course, in Barbie, that is absolutely true. But then Barbie and Ken go back to her playland, and he is suddenly infected with the way that, with acting in all sorts of stereotypical Neanderthal knuckle-dragging male ways. And that's when I started to wonder, okay, so is this movie sending that up? Is this movie looking at the SJW propaganda virtue ticking of the last 10 years of movies and saying, this is ridiculous? We're showing that this is ridiculous by showing that in a stupid, exaggerated form, in a form that's guaranteed to make you think it's all artificial. Is any of that making sense to you?
Yeah. You want to summarize the plot also?
You're going to tell me I'm way over
No, you want to summarize the plot while you're at it? Because you already talked about some of the plot points.
Well, that's basically it. That's basically the plot. It's, if you've seen the Simpsons episode of Malibu Stacy, then you've seen this movie. I guarantee the writers of this movie have seen that episode. Of the Malibu Stacy episode of The Simpsons is this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But nowhere, I mean, when they're in the real world, of course, we get evil Mattel executives. This thing is as much a commercial for Mattel as Oppenheimer is a commercial for the atom bomb. Which, you know, Mattel has bulldozed whole indigenous villages. It has poured concrete into water sources. It has raised whole forests. It has fired 80 million minorities among all kinds of others. It's an absolutely evil corporation that has its own law firm arm, its own paramilitary force, its own governors. If you're watching a movie that can't stop mentioning its name, that's bad. That's really bad. Not as bad as giving a Marlboro Man moment to the guy who invented the atomic bomb. Knew what was going to happen. He knew what was going to happen when it was dropped on civilian targets. He knew that the bloodthirsty president in the Oval Office was going to drop it on civilian targets. Anyway, I don't know where this leaves poor Ami. We start off the conversation talking about crazy guests, and then he has to deal with one. My point with Oppenheimer, I don't have any questions. All I wanted to do with Oppenheimer was broadcast to the audience what it's like if an atom bomb explodes a quarter of a mile above your town. That's all I wanted to do, was describe that. What happens if an atom bomb explodes a quarter mile over your town? What happens to you? That's all I wanted to do, was tell them that. And instead, I couldn't do that. But with Barbie, I had questions. And they revolve around masculinity, because there is a version of masculinity that is put forward in this movie.
Let's spell that out.
It has those neck-bearded quasi-fascists in a frothing rage. A frothing rage. Their mantra since 2016, I wonder why, has been get woke, go broke. The Barbie movie is not going broke. It's making money hand over fist. So they have to ask themselves, okay, well, is it really woke then? They have a mantra to preserve. And unfortunately, a little identity crisis here, I'm in the same boat. Not for the same quasi-fascist reasons, but I'm in the same boat of wondering, is the woke signaling in Barbie ironic? Is it ironically done?
Mhm.
Ken's conversion to toxic masculinity is funny. It's intentionally overblown in the movie. It's done in a cartoonish way. Is that supposed to say that everything in the movie is cartoonish? Or is that supposed to signal to the boyfriends of the young woman going to this movie, that the producers of the movie and the director of the movie think the idea of toxic masculinity is over exaggerated? See what I'm getting at there? Or?
Yeah, to me it's less of a question though. I think to me, the movie is like a hyper real aesthetic. So like everything is over the top. You know, when the classic example is the Mattel board of all men with Will Ferrell and the pink drumstick. Everything's like just ridiculous. The chase scene, which is like a surreal, you know, endless corridors, kind of you know, hallucinogenic world. You know, so everything is like this LSD glasses over it. And so with that aesthetic, with that overlay in mind, I would say it did feel sincere. Like it did feel like this was a hyper real, you know, cartoonish, you know, Barbie playhouse version of masculinity, and the critique and the implied criticism of that is meant to translate as metaphor to masculinity in the real world. That was my reading.
Okay, what does that mean? How we are getting closer and closer to just talking about the crisis of masculinity in general, aren't we?
I think that's our topic.
How's your own masculinity doing, Ami? You have 18 or 19 children, don't you?
Thank God, no, not 18 or 19. How's my masculinity doing? So yeah, I think, well, I feel great, to be honest. I don't have any crisis of masculinity. I feel very, very pleased with myself. But I do know that many people in my generation and younger have described this real crisis of masculinity. And I'm very interested in it as an outsider. I don't feel like I'm in crisis. I never felt like I've been in crisis, thankfully. But I think a lot of people, you know, having empathy for that and understanding what that means and what that says about human beings today and masculinity today and feminism today is very interesting to me. So you asked me how my masculinity is. As far as I could tell, I'm doing great.
Okay,
I think Ken is having more trouble though, and I think Ken is representative of a real person in that sense.
You're bitterly old, right? You're in your 30s.
35, yeah.
God help us. Okay, so when we look at the typical masculinity checkbox that is presented by the masculinity in crisis grifters on YouTube, for instance, and in the podcast circuit, they have a chart. You're doing pretty well on that chart.
Yeah. I was athletic growing up.
You have children.
Yeah.
So you're heterosexual.
Yeah.
You're gainfully employed.
Yeah.
You have a beautiful wife. You have a property of your own.
Yeah.
So, you know, you're pretty much invulnerable to them.
And
no way.
And I've dedicated large part of my life to combat sports.
Even better. Good Lord.
Yes.
Okay.
I check all the boxes.
You check all the boxes.
I check all the boxes. But a lot of people are struggling.
There's one box that you don't check. They try not to mention it because it would hurt their grifting efforts, but they are all virulently anti-Semitic. And you don't check that box. But thankfully. Other than that, yeah, thankfully.
And misogynistic, of course.
Yeah.
But
you could have all the boxes checked that you have and still be a misogynist. Matt Walsh has one.
True. Yes.
Matt Walsh has like 18 children. He doesn't even know how many he has. So it's possible, and of course he's independently wealthy. So it's possible to check all those boxes and still be a misogynist, definitely.
Yeah.
Most misogynists in history have been married.
But what's the crisis? What's the crisis, right? So some people.
Well, I was going to ask. The reason I was going to ask about your age is because I'm wondering: do you personally know anyone who's actually in the bullseye of this crisis of masculinity? Do you know any men between the ages of 18 and 25 who are not related to you?
Sure.
You do.
Yeah, plenty. But again, what's the crisis though, right? The crisis is I know guys who are struggling to get girlfriends, to have meaningful, lasting relationships, and are falling into, I would say, cycles and traps of misogynistic thinking. I know men over, friends of friends, friends of relatives, Facebook friends who fall into the incel trap, like this incel whirlpool, where again, and now to tie it into Barbie, because I think this is what Barbie to some extent is ultimately about. You have a guy who says, I'm a great looking guy. I'm good. I want Barbie to pay attention to me, and she's not paying attention to me, and it creates resentment, and it creates a sense of aggrievement, and something is wrong with the world, and ultimately. What gets blamed is feminism. What gets blamed is this liberated woman, the woman who has all the choices. If I'm reading Les Miserables right now, and it's a trope in many books. But in Les Miserables, Marius falls desperately in love with Cosette, and because he falls desperately in love with Cosette, the universe conspires that of course Cosette is grateful and falls in love with him. But it doesn't work that way anymore. It's not so simple. And men who have this tendency to fall in love, to fall head over heels for a girl, and that girl might have a mind of her own and choices of her own and a social circle of her own and aspirations of her own. I think that's sort of where a crisis can form, and that crisis can bleed into resentment, can bleed into a sense that society is not right, that gender roles are being destroyed in a way that's causing a civilizational collapse, that we need to reestablish, masculine tropes, and we need to reestablish feminine tropes. And to me, that's what Barbie movie is exploring.
Exploring, yes. I still don't know whether or not it's also deconstructing those things. I think there's an argument to be. I'm not going to watch it ever again, so I'm not going to know. I'm certainly not going to write a thesis on it. But I think there's an argument to be made that it is knowingly deconstructing those things. That whole idea that it's knowingly reconstructing them. I think cynically, in order to ensure itself an audience. And if that is true, if I'm right that it was done cynically, it worked. It worked, and we will see more of it.
Well,
we're more of the omnicompetent young woman who don't need no man, presented quasi-parodically, quasi-ironically. We'll see that more and more, if I'm right.
Well, what's cool about that hypothesis is that it creates like a Rorschach test. It creates an opportunity for different viewers to come away from the movie with different impressions. Yes. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And perhaps we came away from the movie with different impressions, which could be an affirmation of your hypothesis here.
Yes. Certainly there was an active element of fan baiting worked into the movie. Certainly they wanted all of those neck-bearded quasi-fascist YouTube channels to scream bloody murder about this thing 4 videos a day until it's out of the theaters. Because in a sense, you can't buy publicity like that. And they know that. So it's bad publicity. It's people saying this is horrible, this is the end of civilization. They are correct in gambling that kind of vicious mudslinging does get people curious to see the movie and might help its bottom line. I guess. I don't really know. All I know is the basic idea of Barbie could have lent itself to far more savage plot development along those lines than it did. The plot development in the movie along those lines, what happens to Ken, is not savage.
Correct.
Playful and funny.
Correct. And he gets a lot of empathy.
The reality of the Barbie world is that Ken has no genitals. And that simple fact of the toy manufacturing could have led to a far more savage movie than we got. So I think there's grounds to wonder what's going on there. I don't really know. But when it comes to the crisis in masculinity, well, there's no doubt that's real. No doubt at all. For me, the interesting question is where it comes from and what to do about it.
Yeah. Well, one answer for some people is that you have to build your Mojo Dojo Casa House, and you have to lean as hard into the masculine tropes as possible. And you have to, that's the brand of an Andrew Tate, right? That's the brand of this shirtless, cigar smoking tough guy with his boys around the round table looking super intense,
And don't let any of those boys fool you. They worship Andrew Tate. Any hint you may have heard, you won't hear it from them, but any hint that you may have heard from third-party commentators about how they're distancing themselves from him because he's going to jail for pimping and slavery, any hint that is true is false. Absolutely false. They all still absolutely worship him. They just are savvy enough not to mention him. But they view his arrest and inevitable conviction and jail sentence as badges of honor, as proof that he is right in everything that he says, in what they, in private, unironically refer to as his teachings. So yeah, he's at the heart of it all. Whether a TikTok grifter like Bryce Hall or a hugely wealthy podcaster like Chris Williamson, or Joe Rogan himself. They might distance themselves from buddying up with him by name, but they do not distance themselves from him. They think he's a hero.
Yeah.
Everything about him is a hero, not just some stuff, but then this stuff was bad. No, all of it, all of it. They want to live in the world that he wants to live.
And what the Barbie movie says, accurately, in my opinion, is that this comes from rejection. This comes from the hurt of feeling like, you know, this woman, I deserve like her love, so to speak. I'm great, whatever. And I was rejected, you know,
Right.
and it creates this like overcompensation into masculinity tropes. It creates this rhetoric, which even Jordan Peterson in his 12 rules for life starts the book with, about like how women are hypergamous, which meaning like they hold all the power in society because the only, you know, 80% of the women only go in for 20% of the men, and all this like all this machinations, all this hypothesizing, theorizing about gender roles, which again is this toxic spiral that is a, you know, a red pill that leads right into the red pill, straight into inceldom, straight into this disgruntled and aggrieved form of masculinity.
And
so,
a kind of warped community, a place that will accept you. But it's warped. It's weird. It's just,
and
of course, it ultimately, I think, stems from the oldest bigotry of them all, which is sexism. It's misogyny is the oldest bigotry of them all. Long before there were different skin colors in humans, there were sexual differences. Long before humans had different skin colors, an average man, could still belt the living daylights out of an average woman. That is the absolute bedrock deep grounding for the oldest bigotry that there is. I think it's easily observable when you watch all of these grifters who are playing off that aggrievement. Somebody actually did this with Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. They went through the book, copied out all the sentences in which the word woman or women appeared, and took out the words women or woman. They just had a stack of those sentences and presented it to a bunch of people and said, what kind of animal is he talking about here? And almost nobody said that he was talking about human beings, because he doesn't think you women are human any more than any of the rest of them do. So you watch these podcasters who have 100 male guests on, then they have a woman on, and you can look on they're filming themselves live. You can see while they're asking questions and fiddling with their ostentatious mic, the look on their face is, I can't believe this thing is doing such a good job of talking.
Yeah. And I think the fundamental question, go ahead.
No,
I think the fundamental question that as a society, young men have to come to terms with, and some have come to terms with it, and some are struggling more, is the way in which we now believe morally, culturally, politically, legally, that women can say no to you. You know, that like women are allowed to put up hard barriers. Say, I'm not interested. This comes up in America's laws. I don't have the details in front of me, but I remember reading about like America's laws around marital rape. Excuse me, marital rape being like only recently like brought into the modern world. The idea that a man can't rape his wife if they're married. You know, these kind of things. And yeah, and that's like something that like, as you're saying, the oldest bigotry, the fact that men are more powerful than women, has always been sort of like an implied, assumed right. You know, how could she say no to me? I'm more powerful, so to speak. You know.
Yeah, and it's talk about gaining ground. It's gaining ground.
Yeah,
enormously, all over the Western world. It's gaining ground. You can see that in the grifters themselves, many of whom have converted to Islam, many of whom are talking about converting to Islam, and they'll say, unified code, man knows where he stands. They're only doing it. Andrew Tate only did it for the misogyny. Sure. That's it. It's the only reason. You see it there, but you also see it in U.S. law. Believe you me, the paleoconservative governing mindset of the Republican Party in the United States hates women, except as breeding machines and sandwich makers. But they hate them otherwise. Absolutely hate them. When I mention to political people that their goal is the 19th Amendment, they don't believe me. They think, oh, come on, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
They say, oh, that's ridiculous. At the same time that states are enacting abortion bans and also banning women from going anywhere else to get an abortion. I'm sorry, you're on the border of my state. I'm wearing reflective sunglasses. I have an automatic weapon at my hip. And if I shoot you dead right here, I might get desk duty for a week, but I won't lose my pension. And we both know that. And so I'm going to ask you, why are you leaving the state? Papers, please. That law has been bruited in 10 different states. Not to ask men why they're leaving the state, but ask women why they're leaving the state, and by silent assumption, to deny them permission to leave the state if they're leaving for a reason you don't like. And the legislatures, all of them, of course, are white men. All of them are white men who look like they were linebackers in high school. When you ask them, they say, well, it's because we don't want them circumventing this law by going somewhere else where this law doesn't apply. And if you ask them, they will say this applies to this law. It absolutely does not. It absolutely does not. So my state, we're going to gerrymander through the end to no fault divorce. In my state, in Louisiana, we might as well say it, it will always be Louisiana. In Louisiana, it's going to be illegal for a woman to divorce her husband. He can only divorce her. She can't divorce him for any reason.
Yeah.
Well, then obviously the same trooper in the same reflective sunglasses will meet you at the border of the state. Why are you leaving the state? I'm leaving the state to serve my husband with divorce papers. No, you're not. No, you're not. Go back home, make him a sandwich.
Yeah. And historically, you look at Jewish law, you look at other religious codes that I'm of course less familiar with. You look at like a show like Oklahoma, for example, which I had seen recently. There's a sense that the girl belongs to the father until the father gives him over to the husband. And if you violate, the husband comes too close, the father's going to shoot you. It's like this protective custody of ownership.
Yes.
Which we've exploded, thankfully, in the modern world. We've eliminated to a large extent those kind of things, and I think there's also now this blowback, of course, this backlash.
You see it in the growing trad wife movement, where the women themselves, the ultimate expression of Stockholm syndrome, where they make YouTube channels saying, well, I'm allowed to go to Walmart and shop for stuff without my husband. The law says I can, but I don't want to. I don't think I can be trusted. I wait for him to go with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Mike Pence.
The ultimate LARPing. If the law said they couldn't do it, the very same women who are making those videos would be screaming the loudest.
And the flip side of that coin, from the male perspective, is like Mike Pence saying he won't have lunch with a female, with a woman, by for any, let's say, political reason, as the case might be, a coworker or something like that. Again, this sense of like these barriers need to be put up, that men and women can't be like coworkers and friends anymore, because the only kind of relationship is like a sexual loving relationship, or they can't even see each other, kind of
or
thing.
A sexual violent relationship,
right?
That it's one or the other. That there's only animosity between the two sexes,
right?
So you will have men's rights activists who are, they're in a job, they're in a workplace, they're in an office, they're in an academic setting, and they have a standard rule. They post it that they will not have a closed door meeting with a woman alone.
Right. Yeah.
Or if they're out at a corporate picnic and somebody says, hey, let's all come over here and take a big picture, they make sure to do the hover hands. My hands are not touching any woman. Because in their mind, they're thinking all of these creatures are just litigation harpies who are waiting to pounce.
Yeah.
So I have to protect myself.
Yeah. Another example just from recent history. Again, I guess we're sort of beating a dead horse at this point, but it's so pervasive. It's like if you have an eye for it, you see it everywhere. Jonah Hill texting his girlfriend, you can't take pictures with guys on the beach, even though you're a professional surfer. Like, this is literally you spend your life, like, you make your money by taking pictures on the beach. But again, it's ultimately about control, and ultimately about ownership and possession and rules and bodily autonomy and life autonomy, and who should have a say over what a woman can and can't do.
Right. The one point that I want to make, you talk about this toxic attitude that is widespread. We should point out that society in its current form is not doing a whole lot to reach out to these young men. In fact, it's doing a whole lot to reach out and tell them exactly what I said, that they cannot be all three of those things at the same time. If you start watching every adaptation, a movie adaptation of every video game, every single movie, every single TV show, every single new novel, if you're in the 0.5% of the men who read, if all of those things are presenting this weird, the word that the neckbearded quasi-fascists on YouTube use is misandry, this just bootless hatred of men, just across the board, regardless of what they do or what they are, or what they say, just they are bad in and of themselves. If all the plastic entertainment all around you presents you with that relentlessly day after day, if you're 18 and you're entering that world, you might start to think, well, there isn't anything for me here.
Mm-hmm.
You did not hit 18 at the time in culture. You would not have encountered that, right? But you must know, young men. You must know, young men.
Yeah.
The point I'm trying to make is that an
18-year-old
could go out into the world, play a video game, watch a movie, stream a TV show on cable, go to a bar or a dormitory get together or meeting of some kind. A young man at hitting 18 and doing all those things now in 2023 would come away thinking he's the worst thing in the world. All of those things hate him. They don't just hate him, they hate him as a matter of course. They don't even bother to make a big issue out of it. It's of course a given that he's the bad guy, that he's horrible. That will work on people, right? I don't think it's any surprise that we're seeing a gigantic increase in incels, which means involuntarily celibate, in mass shooters who are incels, in the men's rights movement, in MGTOW, men going their own way. I don't think it's any surprise that we're seeing a huge uptick in those things. That's not just social media contagion. That's what those men are encountering when they encounter the world. Or am I doing the quasi-fascist neckbeards work for them?
I see differently. I mean, listen, to some extent, I think you're right. I'm not disagreeing that there are men who have an experience which is similar to what you described. My perspective is also there's enough media out there, and there's enough gaming spaces and enough online spaces where men can feel infinitely validated and infinitely, in their Mojo Dojo Casa House from the Barbie reference. I don't feel like that's really under threat to such an extent. But I guess there was another piece which I had in mind to respond to, but I forgot it. So I will stop there, and if it comes back to me, I will.
Well, the broad cultural acceptance of those things is definitely under attack. Those things,
it's changing. I mean, but again,
but
so
they're
here's
not
the
just
point.
blanketly approved anymore.
I think to me personally, looking at the media is sort of I see that more as a symptom, right? The fundamental cause is there is a real change in the politics of relationships. Like that's real, the workplace is really changing, that's real. And I think that is ultimately, again, what leads people to feeling rejected. I think the sense of feeling rejected is very, very painful, especially for a certain kind of insecure man, where their identity, their sense of self-worth is very much tied to whether or not they can be accepted or rejected by a woman. And I think for that kind of person, that's the main issue that I see. Of course, I don't disagree with you that media is also changing as much as everything else is changing. And I don't disagree with you that to some people, the interpretation of that media ingestion is that you are no longer being taken seriously, or you're looked down upon. There's something wrong with you. I hear that. To me, it just feels more secondary to like the political change. And then as I said before.
What would your solution be?
So I think the Barbie movie offers a solution. I think which is a solution and not a solution. It's a solution, but it's not the most actionable solution. But I think ultimately the solution has to be self-worth. Right? It comes down to self-worth. That I think the men who are going to be successful in relationships, in terms of long-term relationships, in all aspects of life, are people who can find their self-worth within. That the paradox is that the hurt comes because you're so tied up in whether or not this girl looks at you, right? Ken in the opening movie, he's so heartbroken, he's so hurt, and Barbie doesn't give him the attention that he wants. His self-worth is tied into the evaluation of Barbie, and that's what leads this downward spiral into bringing ultimately patriarchy to Barbie land. And the end of the movie, the redemption arc, is this the meme, the trope from the song also, I'm enough, I'm enough. This idea that when you no longer have to look outside yourself for external validation, there's a centeredness, there's a happiness within, which also leads to better success with the opposite sex or the same sex or relationships in general. That's my read.
So what would you tell a 19-year-old man who's feeling lost? That's not disputable.
That's hard. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't have a quick, easy answer for that. Off the top of my head, I don't. I mean, the longer answer is ultimately, like I said now, You have to find hobbies and find friendships that aren't revolving around sex, that aren't revolving around ownership, that aren't revolving around, can I call this girl my girlfriend or not? And that involves relationships with men. Again, just to be clear, Steve, obviously I'm tackling this from a heteronormative perspective, and I'm using that heteronormative language. But of course, there's translations of this conversation to all types of sexualities and relationships. Anyway, to return to my heteronormative language, I would tell the guy that you need to just work on learning how to be a friend and be a good person and be a kind, compassionate person who loves yourself and can be in platonic relationships with all sorts of people. And once you get to that stage, then romantic relationships will come. That's my advice. What would you say?
I would very, very much strenuously, I would lunge across the room to remove the very last part of what you just said.
The romantic relationships?
This is not quid pro quo.
Correct. You're right. I 100% agree.
A down payment for a toaster.
Strike it from the record. You're right. You're right. You're 100% right.
You don't know whether or not any kind of relationship will come.
You're right.
You don't know that. All you can do is be worthy of it.
Correct.
You can't make it happen. You can't make it continue. You can't make it what you want, and it shouldn't be your goal.
Correct.
If it's your goal, then your goal is coercion, and coercion is a bad goal. I
agree 100%.
I hope we can agree.
I agree 100%.
I think your point was that if you do make yourself that way, relationships will be more likely to come to you.
Correct.
You won't be, oh my God, I have seen videos from 19-year-old incels who are trying hard to work on their relationship skills, and oh my God, it's horrifying. It's just horrifying to watch. They are so obviously of the opinion that they are owed something. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a cycle. It's such a vicious cycle. It's so pernicious and it's so widespread. The idea of self-help. We've had a self-help discussion in the past, if you recall. But the pernicious, toxic idea of self-help. This idea that I'm going to get coaching, I'm going to read a book, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to improve myself and then get what I want. Which you said, which you correctly criticized my language as implying that, which is a mistake. I don't want to imply that. And that's really the toxic idea, where the alternative idea is I'm okay with who I am. I'm okay with what I bring to the table, and I don't see myself as fundamentally broken. I don't see myself as fundamentally worth what I can get in the sexual marketplace.
Yes. Or a lot of the young men that I talk to, if you do see yourself as fundamentally broken, then fix yourself. But you don't need someone else to do that. Putting the power to help fix you in someone else's hands is disastrous. It's a recipe for disaster. Do it yourself. So if you are a 19-year-old, and again, a 19-year-old young man, and you look around you and see, these, my advice boils down to a maxim from my own generation, which is Gen Z, of course. And that is, make yourself useful. Mothers of my generation used to say that every day. Make yourself useful. Do that. Make yourself useful. You'll be amazed. Not only will it stand a good chance of making you a more attractive person for other people, not just prospective sex partners, but anybody, to stay around. Not only will that make you more attractive just to be around, which is where any kind of relationship, sexual or other, comes from. Not only will it do that, but it will actually fix the things you don't like about yourself so that you will want that affirmation from other people less. Mm-hmm. So you look around and you say, well, these guys with the cut abs and the pillowy pecs are getting more attention from pretty girls. Are your abs cut? Are your pecs pillowy? No. No, they are not. Could you make them that? Yes, you could. Yes, you could. Although, young men or young women, it's only stupid people who are actually going to build a relationship on that. Most women are going to be interested in whether or not you can make them laugh, whether or not you can interest them for the whole length of a conversation, whether or not they would rather sit in their living room and talk to you than go to a movie and daydream about the guy they wish were with them. Are you that person? Mm-hmm. If you're not, you can make yourself that person, but they can't make you that person. You're the only one who can do that.
Yeah. I'll say two things. I think a very important litmus test for a kind of a barometer and how men are doing in this regard is when you feel the pang of rejection, the pain of rejection, which is an inevitable part of human life, can you inhabit the other perspective and say this is a fully developed, fully conscious, autonomous person in the world with their own life and their own choices and their own perspective and their own desires and their own wants, that it's okay. It doesn't have to reflect on you so much. It doesn't have to be like you were stabbed in the heart and now your life is over, as the romantic poets and the, literature of the past, would often like portray those kind of things. But it's, if you see a fully three-dimensional human being in the world making their own decisions, it's okay to be rejected. You're going to get rejected because different people want different things in life in different times, and it's fine. It's just, it could hurt, okay, but it's also totally fine. I think that's a really important test.
I agree, of course. Although I agree, of course. Although the people who've given me my most meaningful relationships in the entire course of my life have never rejected me. I could not even conceive of rejecting me. But then again, they aren't primates. You're all screwed up. So I make a point of not relying totally on primates for relationships. Dogs don't know anything about what you're talking about.
There's another piece here, Steve, which we have to get to. We haven't gone to yet. This is, I think, very important. And I think we talked about how the sexual marketplace has changed. We talked about how the politics of gender have changed. I think that there's a huge confusion for young people nowadays. I think, honestly, if we erase the entire conversation until now, and I just communicated this one point to a potential young person listening to this, I think this is a key point, which is that I think a lot of men and women in the modern sexual marketplace are just looking for different things, are like on different pages. And I see that most clearly with like the Tinder phenomena, where like men are talking about how they're constantly rejected on Tinder, and it's a source of aggrievement, and it's a recruiting tool for Red Pill. Men are always being rejected on Tinder. This proves that women are hypergamous and this, that. When I think in reality, in the real world that I live in, most women, I don't want to talk, so broadly, but stereotypically speaking, are looking for commitment, are not looking for one night stands, are not looking for hookups on a hookup app. There have been studies. There's a lot of good studies about this. I forget the details. If I remember, I could put them up on the screen. I read a study that my brother, who's an expert in this kind of thing, sent to me about, you take a very attractive man to a college campus, and he says to women, will you have sex with me tonight? No one says yes. You take an attractive woman to a college campus, ask men, will you have sex with me tonight? They all say yes, almost. The asymmetry there is out of control. And to not be aware, to be a young man in the dating sphere and not be aware of that asymmetry in what men and women are looking for when they meet, this idea that men are much more interested in casual sex, where women are much more interested in a long-term commitment. To not understand that is a recipe for being completely confused and feeling completely hurt in the world of dating. So that's my hot take right there.
You want to be careful. You're straying close to saying there are
gender
names.
I am saying men and women are different. I'm saying that emphatically.
That's not permissible.
Well, I don't care. I'm not afraid of the PC police. I think men and women are different. I think that I'm not claiming it's biological. I'm not saying it's biological essentialism. I'm open to the possibility that in the feminist utopia, things will be different. I know that it's also not universal. It's not necessarily true for all cultures. I'm speaking in my American friend circle. I'm talking in my upper middle class, predominantly white cultural American context. This seems to be a very clear piece of observable data. And I think that there's scientific evidence to support that existence within this cultural context, at this moment in time, within this same white social milieu, this pattern holds. And so speaking to that potential listener, I feel confident saying to be aware of these patterns, to be aware of these asymmetries. I don't think it has to be this way forever. I don't think it will always be this way. I think other cultures might have different experiences, but this is my experience that I think is important to be aware of.
And speaking to that viewer, if any young man between the ages of 18 and 25 is watching, if I don't know them all already, there are some discrete pieces of advice that can be given that are fairly general. First of all, remove the idea of romantic relationships from your head completely. Take it up by its roots and pull it out completely. A long-standing, stable, healthy, romantic, in other words, sexual relationship is the lottery. It's rare. You want to go out and have casual sex, fine. But expecting a long-term, stable, committed, loving sexual relationship, get that thought out of your mind and concentrate instead on friendship. Meet as many people as you can. Form as many friendships as you can. That stable, loving, wholesome, healthy sexual relationship that you're in the back of your mind thinking about will only develop from friendship.
Yeah,
that's
that's
the only
absolutely
place it's
true.
ever going to come from. So concentrate on friendship without a modus operandi, without an end goal. Do that for your social life. But the main thing you should do is look inside and come up with a list of things you are interested in or like to do or would like to do and work on them. It's a free country. Work on them.
Right.
Do you want to write? Okay, then work on that. Do you want to get really good at cooking for its own sake, not as a seductive tool? Then work on that. Then work on that. Make yourself good at that. Improve that, not for an end goal of winning someone else, but for an end goal of making you feel accomplished. Those things are entirely possible, and they create the sense of self-worth that I think you're entirely right to say it's so endangered. It's so hard to find these days, which is why Steve reserves a lot of ire for the Dude Bro podcast circuit that wants to encourage that insecurity under the guise of arguing against it. They want to encourage it because those people, whether it's, the Manifest Your Destiny crowd, or here's the pickup artist crowd, or the podcast crowd, these guys standing around huge microphones grappling with big thought constructs like they were friggin' Magellan. They might say on the surface that what they want is to help those young men to feel more a sense of direction, but they don't. They're raking in money from them not feeling any sense of direction. The last thing they want is for those young men to wake up and say, oh, this guy's just a grifter. I'm not going to watch him anymore. I watch those channels and they drive me nuts, absolutely nuts. They're willing to do anything. They're willing to say anything. They're willing to be fake credulous about anything. And when you boil it down, it's all exactly the same. It's the exact same kiddie menu at McDonald's. There are only 4 options. It's exactly the same thing. You boil it down past all the stupid verbiage, and it's just Andrew Tate. That's it. That's all. It's just that. If you have a governing worldview that you have to work really hard to hide from the world, your governing worldview is bad. Okay? Yeah. If you have to work really hard to hide that fact, then it's bad. And you should change it rather than working extra hard to hide it from other people. And all of this from the Barbie movie.
Yeah.
Amazing.
To sum up what I think I was saying, what I hear you saying, is that men need to stop being so obsessed with sex. That's my summary.
Yeah, you need to stop being obsessed with it at all.
Yeah, they're right. This goal of just trying to get sex from women, just trying to have sex. That is, I think, the most toxic
goal should be
way of inhabiting the world.
When you die, your goal should be that when you die, you do not leave behind a Succession-style empire full of people who hate your guts. Your goal when you die should be that at least 2 or 3 people say to themselves out loud, alone in a room, I'm pretty much not going to be able to do anything for this next week now that he's not here anymore. I'm just not going to be able to do anything. I'm going to need time to recover from this.
Yeah.
That should be your goal. If you don't have that effect on a couple of people, at least a couple of people, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And you will not get that effect on people by amassing money, building an empire, developing a tobacco addiction, shaving your head, enslaving women. You will not get that reaction from people by doing any of that. When Andrew Tate dies, which I believe will happen 2 years from now in prison, the whole world, including all of the people who worship him and very much esteem his teachings, and that includes all kinds of podcasters who are now won't mention his name, the only reaction they're going to have is, how can I monetize this? They're not going to have a reaction in private, in a room, alone, out loud, of saying, I'm going to need a week. This wounds me. I'm going to need a week to recover. They're not going to feel that because he's not worth it. That sounds very touchy-feely, but that is nevertheless true.
Of course it's true. It's absolutely true. No, I think that's the message, I think, here that we're both getting to. And can we tie this into the Barbie movie somehow? I mean, I don't know if you want to or not, but
not
you're
really.
shaking your head no?
It's an evil company. So, the walk away from the Barbie movie is Mattel is an evil company. They've been industriously pushing stupid Paleolithic stereotypes for almost a century and making themselves obscenely wealthy in the process. Would be my ultimate takeaway from the Barbie movie. Would be that unless you're talking about the actors and actresses involved, we get some really good performances in the movie. What difference does that make when it's all a commercial for a toy company? What difference does it make? Or same thing with Oppenheimer, only much worse. I mentioned on my YouTube channel the joke that was going around that two people who were leaving the Oppenheimer movie were overheard to say, "Hey, you know, I Googled this guy. Did you know he developed the atom bomb?" Because the movie is so intent on glorifying and soft focusing so many other things that the atom bomb that killed people, it killed tens of thousands of people, thousands of them instantly, so no chance to suffer, but tens of thousands of them horribly. They still died in a week, but they died anyway. He didn't stop it from happening. One thing that the movie inadvertently makes clear is how easily one man, him, Oppenheimer, could have stopped it.
How?
He could have physically sabotaged it. He could have physically fed the wrong material. He could have seen the light and talked other people, Tallard or especially Enrico Fermi, into not participating. We're just not going to participate in this. It doesn't matter if our military handlers are telling us that if we don't do this, it's going to mean 500,000 US boys dying island hopping in Japan.
What if it means the Nazis get the bomb first?
Or that the Nazis get the bomb first. Yes. These are interesting ethical questions. I wish that the audience for Oppenheimer were thinking about them, but judging from what I've seen, they're not. Mm-hmm. Not at all. These are all just Nolan bros.
I want to respond. I want to highlight, underscore what you've been saying about Mattel, which I think is a very fascinating, interesting point, which is you said accurately, Mattel is an evil company in the sense that they engage in all the exploitative business practices that international plastic producing corporations engage in, which is creating, legacies of devastation around the world for the low income people who work in those factories and under horrible working conditions, and on and on. And all that's true. And it's also true that this is an advertisement for Mattel, but it's also true, like those things are true. And so there's a very valid argument to make to, let's say, don't give them money. Like that's valid, totally valid. But it's like also true that, like, in addition to all those negative things, this movie brought happiness to, like, I don't know, millions of people around the world, right? Like that's also true. Sure. Which is the nature of, like, the Barbie doll itself. Like the Barbie doll, again, or fast fashion, like all these clothing stores that also have very exploitative labor processes, or Apple to some extent. There's a mixed record for Apple, but your fancy iPod, which is pink and looks amazing and is so great and brings happiness to millions of people, and also has a wake of suffering. Suffering in its wake in the places where it was produced and manufactured, in Foxconn, where people are jumping off out of windows, committing suicide, and there's this paradox at the core of modern capitalism, which all of us, to some extent, hopefully, are trying to wrestle with, which is, what do? You have an option, which is very valid, which say, ethical consumption. Ethical consumption might mean, for one person, certainly, ethical consumption means, being vegan, perhaps. It could also mean not consuming Apple products, for example, or it can mean not consuming Mattel products. But for many people, they're in the middle. They're in the gray area. They're like, what? Apple is messed up. Hurting animals is messed up, but I love my milk with my coffee. And there's this uncomfortable place that modern capitalism puts us in, where we find ourselves getting a lot of joy and happiness from things that are morally very suspect.
The two Steve Jobs movies that I've seen make you hate him. The two Steve Jobs movies that I've seen make you want to switch to Windows. There's a difference between a movie can bring you happiness and a movie that is a commercial for an evil corporation can bring you happiness. There are plenty of things that can bring you happiness. It's obvious that Mattel, the company, that has standing orders in its warehouses in China to shoot slow workers. It's obvious that Mattel went to the movie studio and said, here's a list of what we want. And if you don't give us what we want, you can put tongue in cheek all you want. Let's get that Will Ferrell guy. You can put your tongue in cheek all you want, but if you don't give us this list, you're not making a Barbie movie. And maybe just recreationally, we might have you killed as well. There's a difference between getting happiness out of something like that. I think that argument, the movie also brings enjoyment, and enjoyment is good, is on incredibly weak ground with both Barbie and Oppenheimer. I think it's a sign of the root rot of our time that the Barbenheimer phenomenon from the summer of 2023 is about such morally suspect movies. It's not about, the latest Jaws movie or something like that. It's incredibly suspect in both movie houses. That you're complicit in both those things, at least to a small degree.
I hear you. Steve, I got to run. Take the last word. Finish us off. Sign us off with an uplifting thought to leave us with. And then unfortunately I have to drop off for family matters.
Family matters. All right. Well, I will end with a very uplifting note. We've been talking for a large chunk of this, when I wasn't yelling at you, we were talking about a crisis in masculinity. We were talking about that famous demographic, young men between the ages of 18 and 25. Who feel cut adrift from society. They feel disliked by society. They're a little bit unsure of themselves and what they should do, or what they should concentrate on, or who to listen to. What forms of entertainment am I taking in every day that are probably bad for me, that I'm just not thinking about in the right way? Need a little bit of critical guidance. My uplifting final sentiment is the same as that of Jesus Christ.
What would Steve do? Come to Steve.
Come to me, all you who are labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you peace. If you are in that demographic, contact me. Let's talk it out. It's as simple as that. I'm not making an airy, you should seek help nostrum up in the air. I'm saying, I'll help you. I will help you to do all of this. This is not just me worrying about you in the abstract at all. Not at all. Is that uplifting enough?
It's uplifting, and I endorse that message.